Hey everyone, welcome to a Covalence beginner tutorial on what could be creating your very first web page. If you've ever had any prior HTML, CSS, or JavaScript knowledge, this may be extremely basic for you and you may get bored. So please feel free to skip through it, hopefully learn something from it, and get a little bit of knowledge on what HTML is, how JavaScript files work, how CSS files work, and how they all work together. All right, let's get right into it. All right, so we're going to use Visual Studio Code. You don't need to use this. You could use anything to write a website. You could really just create your HTML in Notepad if you want. But Visual Studio Code provides a really nice IDE. It allows for certain things like autocomplete and IntelliSense, which I'll show you what that is in a second. But for the most part, it just makes life significantly easier. So I included the link for downloading Visual Studio Code. It's available on both Mac and Mac and PC, as well as Linux, I believe, too. It's been a long time since I've used Linux, though. So, but we can go ahead, right-click, and select New File, and we're going to create our index.html. Index is just a stereotypical name, or it's the, I guess, industry default for the file that will be served by the browser, and everybody just kind of typically uses index.html as your base file, right? And so if in your index.html, if you click just one exclamation point, Visual Studio Code has this Emmet abbreviation, right? And so if we go ahead and select that, it actually stub out our HTML page for us. Now, if we wanted to, like I said before, we could reveal this in our File Explorer here, right? And we can just open up with something like Notepad, and you can see that in this document we could just edit this the exact same way, and it really isn't going to make a big difference. It'll actually auto update in Visual Studio Code real time, which is really nice. But again, we could use something like Notepad++, Notepad regular, any type of just text editor to really do this. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to stay in Visual Studio Code. And while if you don't want to use Emmet abbreviations and you want to type this out manually, you can do so. But I'll go ahead and increase this a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. And you can go ahead and type this out if you want. But again, I would stick with using Emmet abbreviations and allowing this. But while you're typing this out, I'll kind of explain what each of these things is. This is a Doctype Declaration, letting the browser know that the content of this page is going to be HTML. This is your first opening and closing tag, right? So everything in this is going to be your HTML, right? So you can see this is the opening tag, this is the closing tag. Now, inside your HTML header and opening and closing tags, you have your head and you have your body. The head is not seen by the user. Everything in the body is, right? So what this is your title. This will actually be what's displayed in the tabs that you have, which I'll show that in a second. And then this is your character set, which we're using UTF-8. By default, I believe it uses UTF-8, but it's always good to kind of specify that kind of thing. And then, it's saying that it wants to essentially do this XUA compatible ordeal where it wants, if it's going to use Internet Explorer, it wants the latest version of it, that kind of thing, which Internet Explorer, nobody really even uses that these days. Edge is kind of the new browser for Microsoft and whatnot, and it uses, more or less a Chromium engine. So again, if you're not using Chrome or Firefox at this point, or one of the, Brave browsers, things like that, definitely I would suggest looking into switching. But our viewport is basically the window itself of the page. So you're saying width is device width, initial scale is 1.0, meaning that we're not zooming in or having some sort of initial scale to begin with. And like I said, the title, this is going to be what's in the tab. Now everything in the head is going to run first, right? So before your page even loads, all of the stuff in the head is going to load. So if we wanted to include something like a CSS link, right? So we can include a link, Emmet abbreviation. This is going to be a style sheet, and we can say that we want to include a file called styles.css. Now this doesn't exist yet. We're going to create it. So we're going to create a new file. It's going to be styles.css. Now, basically, if you don't know what a server is, at the very basic sense, it is basically a file like on a computer somewhere, right? So it's basically just not a file, sorry, a folder on a computer somewhere, and it's just files contained within that folder. And so when you request, even if you request something from Facebook.com, Facebook.com has backend code running when it actually receives that request that'll actually point you to a file that it will then serve back to you, some sort of index.html that it'll serve back to you, right? And then what happens is this file is given back to you, your browser looks at it and it scans the head, it looks for files like this link here, and then it requests these files. So since this is in the head, it's actually going to request this file, bring it back, load this file before it even continues on through the body and whatnot. And so essentially that's how, when you load a website, that's happening every single time you do so, right? If there's 100 of these links, it's going to load 100 of these files before it even starts parsing the body to show and draw the DOM and the elements inside this body, right? So you want to be careful about, what you put in the head, that kind of thing. But for things like styles, you want to load all these styles before you load your body so that the browser can apply these styles as it's rendering everything. So that's why you'll generally see CSS in the head. And things like JavaScript, maybe there are good use cases where you want the JavaScript in the head, but you can also put the JavaScript in the body as well to run after everything in the body is loaded, if that makes sense. If you run it before, the elements may not exist yet that you're accessing. So I'll explain that in a little bit. We'll create a JavaScript file, go through all of that as well. So let's go ahead and start adding something in this body. Let's just say we're going to add a div. A div is basically just some sort of container, right? It's really not any kind of special element whatsoever. It's the most generic element in HTML, and it's used I would say most often when developing HTML, right? And so think of it as like a base element. There's nothing special about it. By default, it's block display, takes up the whole width of its container. It has no height by default, but will expand to the height of the content you have inside, right? So inside this div, let's put a h1, which is a header of type 1, and I'm going to put my name. And real quick, we're going to go ahead and we're going to load up this page. So we're going to open up this file here, and I'm going to click on index.html, and again, it's going to open this page in the file domain, right? So it's actually looking at a local file on our computer. Now, if this was a server and it was hosted somewhere, it may have an actual HTTP address, right? And what that index would do is this might be the address of some folder somewhere, in the internet. You know what I mean? It could be anywhere. It could be a physical computer somewhere, or it could be some virtual computer. And it might actually just be looking at a particular folder and then serving up this file that you're requesting. That would be if there's no code at all running in the background. Now, today, a lot of servers will be running code, and they will do different things with each request. They may look at the request and make sure that you have the right authorizations to be accessing this file, right, before it actually serves you the file. And a lot of times you won't actually see a file itself that it's looking for, and so it's saying it might take a look at like something like this, and it might say, okay, well, if we're looking at just the root, by default we're going to serve the index.html. But since we don't have any code running right now to determine that and serve the right file, we actually have to include. So if I included this, right, it's going to show just some weird directory, right? And it's actually just kind of this browser it has this little sheet that it created to mimic your local file system and your local folder here. And so your browser is cool. It has these special features like this that will allow you to kind of look at your folders and directories and whatnot. And it gives you this UI to easily be able to select this and go into it. But if we were to say styles.css, right, there's nothing in this styles.css file. If we added something in here, let's just say we said h1, right, and we're going to say font size 90%, right? We want it to be a little bit smaller. All right. So now if we go ahead and we reload this, it's actually going to show that file itself, right? So we requested this file and it returned that file. So let's go ahead and open up our index.html again. And now we have this, obviously this font size is very small. This is going to be 95% of the base font size. So it's something around, 12, 13 pixels or whatnot. So let's go ahead and we're going to remove that for now. We don't want that. We want that, that bold H1 in here. And let's just say that we want to, on top of this div, we want to have some sort of, upper, div above this that has an image in it, right? And this image, we want to display a picture of yourself, right? And maybe we wrap this whole div or everything in its own div, right? All right, so we're going to give this a class. We're going to say that this is going to be called just container. All right, because we want to include everything in our body in some sort of container. Maybe we just add a little padding around the whole thing. And then we're going to have a div here, which we can say class equals, we'll say, avatar. And what we'll do is, just to kind of show you, we can add a, let's call it images, right? It would be a folder called images. And if we look over here, we can see that all it did was just create a folder in our directory called images. And then inside of images, we're going to create, what we'll do is we'll take I have this little picture here that I pulled over, and we'll drop it right inside of images, right? So there we go, picture of me. All right, so that's going to be inside images, the folder images, and the file name is mattmorgan.jpg. So what we'll say is we'll say images / mattmorgan.jpg. Again, IntelliSense and autocomplete, very cool. We'll say alternate text if there's a problem loading the image, or for something like screen readers, the alternate text will just be Matt Morgan picture, right? And or maybe we'll call it headshot, just to be a little bit more specific. All right, and this div here, this avatar div, we'll actually create a class for it. So we'll say .avatar, the period here targets class name, right? So we're targeting this div here using this class avatar. And what we want to do is this image, images by default are display inline, right? So if we load the page right now, all right, we'll see that, whoa, this image is huge, right? Takes up way too much space here. So what we want to do is inside .avatar, we want to say, we'll have .avatar and we'll have .avatar image, right? And what this means is that we're targeting an image inside of an element with the class name avatar. So, right, even if you hover over this, it'll actually show an element, class avatar, and an image inside of it, right? So we want to say that, let's just say we want the width to be something significantly smaller. Let's say 10 ems, which is the width of 10 letter M's, and it'll adjust with font size, right? So if we load this now, we can see that's a much better looking image. Maybe we want it, a little bit bigger. Let's just say 15 ems for now. All right, increase it, by 50%. All right, now that's looking good. And maybe we want it to be in the middle of the page, right? So because this is an inline element, if we open up Chrome DevTools, which you can hit F12 in Chrome, or you can hit these three little buttons here, more tools, developer tools, and it'll allow us to actually inspect our document object model. So you can see all of our elements in here. You can see it gets highlighted, so this div takes up the whole width of the page. And inside this image, it actually has what's called a display of inline, right? And so what we can do is if we actually allow it, if we say text align center, it's going to shift this to the center of the page. And so this will actually give us, it follows, basically images kind of follow the same rules as text unless we specify differently, right? So we want to say text align center, and we also maybe want to say that all H1s, we also want text align center. So let's do this. We could actually do something like this if we wanted to, but we don't know. We might end up styling avatar more. So for now, we'll just kind of reiterate this, and we'll say all H1s also text align center. So let's load this, and we can see, bam, Matt Morgan. And let's also create a class for container. All right, so in this container class, let's just say we'll put padding in the top and bottom, let's say 5 ems, and then on the left and right, we'll do let's say 1M. All right, and then so what this means is this is actually your top and bottom padding. This is your left and right padding. It's the exact same as doing this. So it goes top, right, bottom, left. And if you want the same top and bottom, the same left and right, you can actually just do shorthand, and this applies to both the top and bottom. This applies to the left and the right padding. All right, so now if we reload this page, we can see that it's pushed down a little bit, and we can look at this container here, and we can see that now we have this green padded area. All right, and we can also see this body has this margin here. So what we can do is that's just a browser default, and we just want to say margin 0, padding 0. We're going to remove all that from the body. Some browsers will do that, some won't. So now if we reload this page, we can actually see that the body itself doesn't have that anymore. All right, so we should be good to go there. And what we want to do is for the demo purpose, we're just going to kind of have this little header here. It's going to be like, hi, I'm Matt. And down below it, we'll just have a description, right? So we have our picture, we have our name or our header, and then we're going to have just some kind of text, just saying who we are, really. So let's just for now, let's see. Let's first do the hi, I'm Matt, right? And then let's do an H2, and we'll give ourselves a title. And why don't we do something cool here to showcase how this really should work. So we're going to give this thing a class called text center, and then we're going to give this div also text center, and then our avatar, instead of having this, we're going to just say text center, text align center. And now that applies to both this div and this div. And so now everything in this div is going to be text center. And then for this, what we'll say is this is going to be a subheader. And what we can say is that our subheader is going to have a color of, we'll do RGB, and we're going to make it kind of like a gray. So let's see, this should be a nice little gray. Let's see what happens. Hi, I'm Matt. Software developer is my title. Let's just say, let's take a look at this. We'll see here that there's actually margin on the top and bottom, and there's margin on the top and bottom here. So let's probably want this to be a little bit smaller. So let's go ahead and instead of making this an H2, let's make it an H3. Oops. Save that, and bam. All right, cool. That looks a little bit better. Hi, I'm Matt, software developer, and then underneath that, we're going to have a description. Now let's just grab some lorem ipsum text for now, and we can just say 5 paragraphs, sure, generate lorem ipsum. All right, and so normally this would be a little bit more about us, but we're going to just give this a div. We don't want it to be text centered, but we're going to basically paste all of this lorem ipsum text in here. All right, and what we're going to do is we're going to wrap each of these in a paragraph. And when I'm creating these, whoops, there we go. When I'm creating these elements, all I'm doing is I'm typing and I'm using Emmet abbreviation, which I'm just clicking tab and it's creating the element for me, right? So if we wanted to add something with a class too, we can do p.textCenter and then tab, and it's going to actually stub out your element with the class. So a very cool Emmet abbreviation shortcut using Visual Studio Code. And all right, so now if we load this page again, we should see that we now have hi, I'm Matt, software developer, and we have some lorem ipsum text, right? Now this text kind of looks bad, so what we can do is we can actually call this div here. Let's give it a class, and we'll call it just wrapper, right? And what this wrapper is going to do is it's going to have a max width of, let's just say 40 ems. And now if we do this, what's going to happen is, see how this happens where it kind of cuts it in half. This is a little small. Let's change it to 45 ems, but we want this to be centered underneath everything, right? And so let's say 45 ems. And what that will allow us to do is we can do something called margin 0 auto, right? And so this means the margin top and bottom is going to be 0, but auto on left and right, which is going to mean that it's going to push it equal amounts. Now this doesn't work for everything. Auto doesn't, it's not magical, but for margin it does happen to work if the element has an actual width. And by setting this max width to 45 ems, it's going to actually have a width, right? And so if we reload this page, we can now see that it's still left aligned. It's not text center, but we now have this container where it kind of keeps everything nice and just kind of, you know, good looking, right? And so it's sometimes people will put this wrapper around the entire page. In our particular case, we don't need to do that, but you can see that, you know, as this shrinks, all right, it'll actually work well shrinking and expanding. All right, so now we have this. Now, again, this page has no JavaScript. It has a CSS file. If we wanted to actually see a little bit more, do something kind of cool, what we could do is we could add a little bit of JavaScript, and we'll put a button in here where this may be hidden by default, but if you want to learn more about me, then, you know, we'll click this button and it'll show this, right? And so what we can do is we'll actually add above this, we'll add another div, and we'll add a button, and inside this button we'll give the button a class, is call it learn more, and we're just going to say learn more here. And what we can do here is we'll say that this wrapper, will give it a additional class called hidden, let's say. All right, and what we can do is we'll say that we'll have this learn more button, so learn more. Let's go ahead and say that the I don't know, let's just say that it'll be, trying to think of what a good color scheme would be for this. Let's say background color, let's say Dodger blue. The text color will be white. Border radius of 4 pixels. And we'll give it a little bit of padding. We'll say the padding on the top and bottom is 0.5 ems, and the padding on the left and right is 1 em. All right, and we'll say border none. We don't want any border at all. And also, our avatar image, we could also add a border radius as well. And what that should do is 50% should actually allow us, since our image is square, it'll actually give us a nice circle effect. All right, so we have our button in here. Unfortunately, it's over here. So we actually have to center this. So let's do our little trick again. And the button, I believe, is inline block by default. It may be inline, but I think it's inline block, which is the display. So it should still work with text center. It should behave, and it does. But you can kind of see that, you know, clicking it doesn't do anything right now. But let's go ahead and take a look at what we can do to change that, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at this button right now. Let's say that there is a ability where we can actually say that we want the cursor to be pointer. All right, and so if we do that, it now kind of looks like a little pointer showing that it is clickable. And we can also say that there's these things called pseudostates. So we'll say learn more active, meaning that that's when the button's pressed. And we'll say that the background color is going to be something a little bit darker than Dodger blue. So let's just say blue, see what happens there. All right, so we get this little effect where when we click down, it turns to a darker blue, and when it's not clicked, it's lighter, right? Cool, so what we can do is we'll now hide .hidden. We'll say that the display is none, meaning that anything with this class hidden will actually be pulled out of the flow of the DOM. So we now have display none, still not doing anything. When we click learn more, what we need to do that is JavaScript. And so we want to add a JavaScript file at the end of this body. If we were to put it in the head, we could put it in the head, but we'd actually have to use an event called DOM content loaded, meaning that we'd have to listen for the DOM itself to tell us that it's loaded the elements. The other thing we can do is we can just load the script after the DOM loads the elements. So after everything, we can put in a script tag here. And let's see, I wonder if we can actually get some, yep, script with a source. And our source is, we're going to call new file, and we'll just say, we can call it just index.js, why not? So we're going to say our source is index.js, and in here, it'll actually run this page at the end. So if we wanted to put a console.log, we could put in a console.log in here, and when we load this page, we can actually see in our console it logged hello, right? So what we want to do is we want to query that button. So we can query selector, and we'll query learn more. So we're actually querying basically the CSS selector for it. All right, and we can say set this to a var. So we'll say let button equals document.querySelector learn more. And again, probably a good idea to always use const for using modern JS, because we're not going to be changing this button. And the button itself, we're going to want to say button.add event listener, and we're going to listen for a click. And when this button is clicked, we're going to perform a function here, right? And inside this function, we are going to want to remove that hidden element, right? And so right here, our wrapper, it contains hidden. So we'll say const wrapper equals document.querySelector wrapper. And if we wanted to use IDs, we could add IDs to these things. So if you actually wanted to put, you know, an ID on here, you could say content, right? The ID is content. And instead, instead of using query selector, you could actually use document.getElement by ID. And you wouldn't actually have to use the ID selector. You could just say content there. Or if you wanted to use query selector on the ID, you could do this. The hash mark here specifies an ID selector. But we're just going to stick with wrapper because we only have one wrapper. We know that it's going to be, if we had multiple classes or multiple elements with this class wrapper, the query selector is going to find the first instance of it, and that's what it's going to give you. It's not going to give you multiple elements. It's going to give you the first instance of it. There is a function called query selector all, and this will return a list of all of the elements that it finds. So query selector is quick. It's going to find the wrapper and the button. And inside this click function, what we want to do is we want to say wrapper.classlist.remove hidden, and we'll actually remove the button as well, the add hidden. All right. So basically, it's going to remove the button and it's going to add the wrapper, right? And I know it's kind of confusing, right? Because we're adding a class to remove it and we're removing a class to add it to the DOM. So if everything works accordingly, we should be able to run this now. And when we click the button, it'll remove the button and it'll actually add the text. All right. So super simple web page. Looks good when you shrink it. And hopefully you guys learned a little something. Till next time. All right, so hope you all learned something from that. Again, it was super simple. I hope it was a little bit of fun. And just so you know, this is developing something locally on your local file system. All websites that you go to today don't work this way. It's very unlikely that you ever request, facebook.com/index.html, right? So there would be code running in the background on most servers, or at least modern day servers, that are looking at the request and the requester and determining what page to actually return to them and show them, and the browser itself will then take over, right? And so if you want to learn more about that, be sure to not only subscribe to our channel, but also check out Covalence.io's full stack bootcamp. And so we go through the front end and the back end. We go real in depth into creating your own servers using Node.js. And I guarantee you that if you're interested in development and you enjoyed this, you will really enjoy that. So please be sure to post in the comments if you guys have any other ideas in terms of what content you'd like to see. But hope you learned something and hope you had some fun. All right, until next time.